Can we have a roll call, please, Anissa?
Commissioner Fike?
Here.
Commissioner Buttrick?
Here.
Commissioner Ransford? Commissioner Bloomer?
Here.
Commissioner Gordon?
Here.
Commissioner Grand?
Here.
Commissioner Stopper?
Here.
Commissioner Pearlman? You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? And if not, if someone wants to make a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Thanks, Roseanne. Is there support?
I support that.
Robert? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. Moving on to approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which was held on Thursday, June 6th. If we could just take a moment to review those. Okay, I just see a typo on page 4, under F2. Drone is DR is spelled incorrectly, so under the second paragraph, under F2. Are there any other changes?
Yeah, and on page 2, Commissioner Bloomer's paragraph, the first line should say, "and shared a little by herself." And then she and her husband's apostrophe S, a couple of typos.
Any other changes?
I know it indicates that I came later, but I was, maybe I guess it's a roll call, so I guess I wasn't here for roll call, so.
But you were here for
We're
everything
fine.
else.
I was here for everything else.
All right. Any other changes? Okay, does someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Is there support?
Support.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is public commentary. And seeing that we have some, okay. No comments from the public at this time, that I'm seeing. Moving on to old business. Is there any old business that anyone wants to discuss? No. Okay, moving on to new business. Under new business, we have Greenbelt Advisory Commission officers. We do this annually. It's nominations and voting. So I would like to, currently I'm the chair and John Ramsberg is the vice chair. And John is going to be out of the country for, I think, about 6 months. I think starting in January. So I would like to make a motion to nominate Stephanie Buttrey as vice chair. And is there support for my motion?
Support.
Julie? Oh, I think Julie beat you to it. Sorry.
Wow,
All right.
that's good support.
And do we have any other nominations?
Yeah, I nominate Jennifer to remain as chair.
Do we do the one, I don't know, Julie, I'm looking at you.
I see.
Should we do the one first?
one first.
We have Chris Ross from the attorney's office. Are there any changes, just while you're here? I know all the commissions, there have been some trying to get consistency in voting. So I know there used to be, you could do, some commissions did paper ballots, and now we're supposed to do voice vote. And do we do them individually, or can we do them collectively?
Oh.
Good to know.
This is what happens when I show up at a meeting.
It's your own fault.
You can do it either way. I'm not sure what the typical practice, I think, is that They'll do one at a time, chair and then vice chair.
Okay, but if there's only one for each, we could do them
Yeah, if you want to do a
collectively and
slate,
voice vote, and we
propose a
can
slate,
voice
that's
vote it.
fine.
Okay,
Okay,
it
and
just
voice
can't
is
be on
fine?
paper, it needs to be
Yep,
voice
yep,
vote.
voice is
Okay.
fine too. yeah.
Okay, great. So we currently have 2 nominations for vice chair and chair. Are there any other nominations? Okay, and there was support. Was there support for the nominations? I think Julie?
Sure.
Or,
Yes, I'm happy,
okay.
I'm happy to support.
And second?
Second.
Stephanie? Okay, all those in favor for the current nominations, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thanks, Chris. All right. And next up on the agenda is our Greenbelt Advisory Commission Strategic Planning Session, number 1, which I'm happy to welcome representatives from Bridgeport Consulting, Annika and Fran. If you want to introduce yourself and take it from there.
Thank you. So I'm Anika Madio. This is Fran Alexander. We're with Bridgeport Consulting. For those of you who have not worked with us before, we are a small but mighty local consulting firm. We work predominantly in Southeast Michigan, and we work primarily in 3 disciplines: strategic planning, public engagement, and by that we mean engaging the public in the decisions that will impact their lives that local government is making, and then change leadership, which is sort of a more nebulous field that often intertwines with the other 2. But we're certainly going to be focusing here on the strategic planning and on the public engagement aspects of the work. So Fran's kind of going to wait in the wings a little bit, but I've asked her to chime in along the way, so please, Fran, feel free to do that and speak up. So we were hired to support and facilitate the strategic planning process, including that public engagement. I'll tell you a little bit more about the revised timeline and plan for this process, which I know you saw a previous version of, and you were just handed an updated version. But first, I wanted to cover what we were hoping to get out of tonight's conversation. So you have an agenda that says facilitators agenda on the top of it, and I'm looking at the desired outcomes at the top. So we'll start by reviewing the strategic planning process, the timeline, and the role that the commission will play in this process, and then discuss and refine the proposed approach to stakeholder engagement. And so it'll kind of include doing the presentation we'd like to do for the public with you all so that you can give some feedback to Remy, because he's, and Lee, who have put a lot of work into that presentation, and also to give you an idea of what we have in mind for what folks in the public would see before being asked their opinions on what to do going forward, right? So we'll kind of mirror that here tonight. We're also interested in identifying what are your values, priorities, and potential strategic questions to be explored during this process. Okay, so I'll have a few questions that tap into that. And I had the pleasure of meeting first with the executive committee to plan tonight's meeting, and so I was struck by how long some members of the commission have been on the commission and the depth of knowledge of what has been happening in the, maybe not all the full 15 years, but in the most recent years. So I look forward to hearing also from the rest of you. Could we start really briefly by going around, I guess, you have names, so you don't, up here, you don't necessarily need to focus on that, but I was wondering how long you've been on the GAC and what drew you to the work, just briefly, if we could start there.
Stephanie, you want to start?
Sure.
This is Stephanie. We'll start that end. Move this way.
Is this about 2 years, I guess? I think this is about 2 years for me, and I am a farmer as well as a sociologist, and I study a lot of land use. So here I am.
My name's Roseanne Bloomer, and this is my second meeting.
Welcome.
And my husband and I have a farm just north of Ann Arbor.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm Stephanie Botry, and I've been on the commission now for, I think, 6.5 years, maybe 7 years. And I'm a member at large, longtime Ann Arbor resident.
And I'm Jennifer Fike, the vice chair of the commission. I have been on the commission for, I think, 6 years, sounds about right. And I currently work for the National Wildlife Federation, so I'm one of the environmental representatives to the commission.
Hi, I'm Robert Gordon. I have been on the commission for a little bit over 2 years.
Great.
At the time I was appointed, I was the lobbyist for the State Sierra Club.
I'm Julie Grand. I represent Ward 3 on the Ann Arbor City Council. I've been the liaison from council to this commission for 4.5 years. Prior to being on council, and I'm still also liaison to the Park Advisory Commission, so I've been doing that for over 10 years now. So it's really old. So I've always been, I have a background in health policy and been interested in policy in land and just in land use issues in general for the city, and just really believe in the mission of what this group does, and so was really pleased to come on board and support it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sheila Schuler, and I'm faculty at the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. I teach ecology there and have a background in program, specifically ecological evaluation, program management, and adaptation, and so I wanted to bring that to the commission. I've only been here since January is when I started.
Excellent.
This year.
Okay. So what's really nice is you have folks who've been here for a while and have the historical context and have thought deeply about these issues, and then you have folks who can help us ask the question of, why do we do it that way again? Because I'm new, and so you get that fresh, you kind of have that excuse to say, is this the way we want to keep doing things, or what was the thought behind this, because I wasn't here. So really valuable to have that spread. Let's just turn our attention to the Greenbelt Strategic Plan timeline. I believe you saw an earlier draft of this timeline. It's just been revised a little bit as I worked with Emmy and Remy to plan the strategic planning process, and also met with the GAC Executive Committee to get their initial thoughts. So the work that happened in June, we kicked off our work, and then Remy has been doing a bit of an outreach tour to a number of different groups, the Mayor's Green Fair, Huron River Watershed Council, and Dexter Historical Society. And then here we are tonight at the first of 2 meetings that we plan to have with you, sort of bookending the public and stakeholder engagement process. So the first public engagement session will be held on July 29th, Westgate Branch in the evening. You then have a regular meeting that I will not be attending shortly after that. And then the plan is for Remy to do a series of township talks, and the idea that came up with that is to have one GAC member attend with him to each of those. And I don't know what the total number on those. Does that mean 1 or 2 per commissioner, or?
There's townships.
Okay. So one, ideally, yeah. And what we were hoping is that that would allow for a broader public engagement effort than what is, sort of contracted with Bridgeport, right? And allow you to actually each have the opportunity to be hearing what does the public and the stakeholders think are the strengths of what they're hearing that the Greenbelt has done, and what are their interests moving forward. And so then when we come back, having finished the sort of formal public engagement process, and you've done this tour of conversations, we should have really rich data on where we'd like to go with the next strategic plan. And if you don't like that idea, you can take it up with Remy as far as your involvement goes. But that was an idea that we thought might be a nice opportunity for all of you as well. The second public engagement session is August 15th at the Traverwood branch. We were looking at being on sort of where the outskirts of Ann Arbor meet with the neighboring communities. That's why we chose those 2 library locations. Just to be clear, these public engagement sessions would be open and advertised to the entire community, but also, if I understand, the plan is to reach out specifically to stakeholders who've been involved with this work to make sure that they've heard about these meetings and are invited to come. So, landowners, folks from the surrounding community, we certainly wanted to extend the conversation to both Ann Arborites and the communities where some of this land preservation is happening. Then we'll come back here. We'll debrief on what we've heard in the public engagement process, what you've heard in your role in the township talks, and we'll propose some potential directions based on what we've heard and ask you for your feedback and your pushback and your additional thoughts. And then we will take that and draft a report on the stakeholder engagement findings and proposed strategic directions, which we would then like to also share with City Council to get their feedback before it is revised and becomes a more final product in November or December. Questions of clarification or comments on the proposed timeline process?
Julie?
This is more for Remy, but when will we get a list of when those meetings will be for the townships?
I will do my best to keep you all aware of when they actually get booked. I only have the ones with the funded townships booked right now.
Okay.
One is July 22nd, and then the other two are in August. But I have not begun reaching out to the unfunded townships, so I need to do that.
Okay, great. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's taking some vacation in August, but still want to do my part, so the sooner we can learn this, the better. Yeah, thank you.
I'll keep you all posted.
Another question, for the meetings at the Ann Arbor Public Library, the one in August, is it possible to get it in their little calendar of August events, or is it too late? Just a thought. I know it's too late, obviously, for July, because that's out.
You mean?
No, they have a little printed booklet.
That I don't know.
Well, Remy, I'd be glad to follow up.
I have a contact that I've been working for Room Res Editions,
Oh.
who can probably
Okay.
right to have contact with that.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the timeline, proposed approach to strategic planning? Okay. One thing that I skipped over is that we would want to consider whether we've done thorough enough community engagement. So you see that note where we talk about getting city council feedback. We want to make sure that we've heard as many perspectives as we can. So Fran and I have combed through, Remy gave us an awesome set of materials that included news articles and the former strategic plan, previous strategic plan, and the survey that was done by University of Michigan students. So we've combed through all of that and begun to sort of percolate up some emerging themes and key strategic questions. But before we share that with you, we would like to start by hearing about your perceptions and your early impressions, or for some of you, impressions that you've been forming over your years of work on the GAC. So I'd like to, again, do a round of questions to each of you. Based on what you've seen in your time here, or what you've heard of the first 15 years of the Greenbelt Initiative, what successes are you most proud of? And what's one aspect of the program that's worth carrying forward? One thing you'd like to see considered for the future of the Greenbelt, or something you'd like to see the Greenbelt stop doing, Greenbelt effort stop doing. So I'm going to write up here, success, start, stop. There's one aspect of the program that just makes you proud to be involved in this work. I just think this is really point of pride. It's been a success for us. But then also, and you don't have to answer both of these, or either one if you don't want to. But is there something that you think, man, we should consider starting or stop doing something that we do I have a volunteer who wants to go first?
Sure.
So
Well,
we don't
I'll
just
go.
put it on Stephanie?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah? Next one, duke it out.
What are we at, 5,400 acres now? Yeah, 5,491. 5,500 acres.
just bounce around.
Yeah, I agree. That's also what I was gonna say, so for success.
And I would add to that, that you're starting to see blocks of farmland that make, very viable farm operations possible.
Yeah, it's starting to look like a greenbelt around the city. Like Remy had a time-lapse graphic that we saw recently. It might have been an executive committee meeting, I don't remember, or I might.
No, I saw it.
Okay, and it just, but it showed before the greenbelt and after the greenbelt and how it's really, it looks like it.
We have real successes in terms of leveraging funding.
Yeah.
And increasing the number of ways that we access funding and the size of that funding. So that's really exciting to me. I also had emphasis on local food, which I think we didn't have as much on the beginning, and I think resonates with people in the community.
The local food production, I would say, I don't know that, currently we don't attribute points to that in our scoring criteria. And it's something that we might start to consider.
Yeah, that is something we've been talking about in the scoring meetings. Specifically, how could we weight it to make sure that they get extra points or it offsets some other place so that we're not just privileging, larger commodity type operations. Yes,
I'll
do
add-
more of that.
So you're going to go? I'll add from my perspective of not having been here that long, that I don't have that long, I've seen the time lapse, but I don't have that long-term perspective of how much we've accumulated. But what was interesting is my first meeting was right after City Council did not accept one of our recommendations. And so I would say, and to me that was, I didn't know how unusual that was. And so now I've come to appreciate that the City Council's support has been, I think, a measure of success throughout the whole time. If that happened only once in the whole history of the program so far.
I think to that end, though, one of the successes is starting to be able to more clearly articulate why we should be supporting something, and that's maybe in the start, or continue to do more of it, which is, relatively new. So I guess we're stopping taking for granted that it just goes through.
Or that everybody knows what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so taking forward this idea that, I guess we have to keep reminding what the original village's purpose was and how that started, why it should be carried forward.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, maybe just stop taking support as given when it might not be there.
And matching funds. They might not always do that.
The matching
And
funds.
matching funds.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Support both in terms of council votes, matching funds. Yeah.
Political and economic support.
No resting on your laurels.
Mhm.
I'm still concerned about the lack of general knowledge about the Greenbelt out in the community.
So
And-
are we.
Okay.
That
And
means
I-
gonna come out from what we heard too. We heard that there's an opportunity to do a better job sharing the story of
Yeah.
what
Yes.
the Greenbelt is and what it has achieved.
And what it isn't, even maybe
Exactly.
as
Right.
importantly,
Yes.
I think. Because there's where the misconceptions are undermining.
And I know it's a bit complicated with parks and with Greenbelt, and money can be used for this, but not for that. But we need to do a better job of getting that out there somehow.
What else? Anything else find out we have successes of the acreage, the blocks of land starting to look like a belt, leveraging money, emphasis on local food, council support, and the beginnings of a clearer articulation.
So it's something, even though we're halfway through, we've spent quite a bit of the millage money. So start thinking about what the plans are for when the millage ends.
Yes.
I'm going to add as a success because it's something that really impressed me coming. I thought there was the GAC, and that's who did most of the stuff, but it's Remy and team that do an enormous amount for making this work, and that has worked and continue. Like the continuity of the contribution that they bring compared to what the GAC does, I think that is something that not only we need to mark as a success, but be really careful not to take for granted so that it can continue.
These are the heroes.
They're the unsung heroes in that, yeah.
Go team.
Sheila, do you mind speaking into your
Oh,
microphone?
sure.
Thank you.
Put it right in front. Did you get what I said, though? Remy is awesome, is basically what I said. Okay.
Well, and I think, yeah,
The
having
Conservation
the
Fund.
continuity, I mean,
That's
the-
what but
Right.
it's not just that we have an association with the Conservation Fund, it's that the people who have been representing for GAC from the Conservation Fund have done an enormous amount continuously, and that seems really important.
So I would say the success, this goes back to the beginning, is that when the millage was passed, it passed overwhelmingly. It went through, and I don't recall if we were talking about some of the history of it, but it was contentious initially. Back, I mean, I was here in town when it first was being discussed, and I think there was a vote that did not happen, and then it came up again. There were a lot of stakeholder engagement, media, public outreach that was done, and that turned the tables. So, yeah, having that overwhelming support from City of Ann Arbor voters to approve the millage was a great success.
I can't remember if I told the executive committee folks this, but my brother and sister-in-law were in school here for urban planning at that time, and in Halloween, she dressed up like the Greenbelt. She was dropping little pieces of fake grass on her. So I have that in my mind as, the time when
Hilarious.
Greenbelt was going to be debated.
We need pictures to use for our marketing materials.
Awesome, original or success. Anything else on the start or stop? We always have a short, the list of what should we stop doing is often short. Is there anything else that you would put on that we should get over that? We should stop doing that. Make a change.
I want to, I don't know, quite know how to say this, but all farms make a contribution to the community, whether it's those that are growing local food or those that are farming commodity crops. So I think it's important to contribute to the local food economy as much as a farm can, but that might not be realistic. So I want to, I don't know.
Don't be too narrow.
Right.
Thinking about the value of the farm.
And especially when we think about who farms.
Would you say more about that, Jennifer, about who farms?
Well, I mean, it's been changing over the years, and I mean, this is just me viewing the landscape of who is farming right now and who I see personally, but because I'm not in that work so much anymore, that there are more farms growing local food for local markets, but there are still, the majority of farms in Washtenaw County are not, and in the town, the land surrounding the city of Ann Arbor. So it may not be anyway, for what it's worth, that there are many different kind of farms.
And there's also, I have learned there's sort of the short-term landscape, and then there's the future potential, right? For the use of that land, for the transfer of farms to other young farmers, et cetera. There's sort of the long view.
I think maybe to put a positive spin on that is just value all farms equally, right? Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, but I worry some thing, you know, if we go into a mindset where we're just gonna try to do the organic or just gonna try to do the local, we are gonna be losing out on larger parcels, and yet we need to make sure everybody's valued, I think. At least that's what I was hearing from what your point was.
It also maybe hints at one of the strategic questions that we've heard come up is, you know, is there an ideal proportion of, you know, how the land is used or the type of farming that's happening? You know, is there an ideal amount of sort of local farming versus other?
Sure.
So that will continue to be a question, I think. Any last thoughts before we move on from this?
This is kind of specific, but it's something we've discussed in the scoring committee, just that we're going to stop using particular measures that are outdated.
Yeah.
Do you have ideas in mind? Measures that a lot of people are saying aren't delivering?
Like, off the top of my head, Remy, do you remember some of the ones that were not?
We discussed road frontage
Mhm.
as a measure of developability.
View.
And view sheds.
View.
We've also discussed that the original millage information language initiative really focused on source water protection, yet we don't have a lot of points attributed to being a tributary of any river, let alone the Huron River and source water protection for the city. So emphasizing that maybe moving forward.
And some strategic blocks that had been identified that no longer really apply or should be shifted, that kind of thing.
That's a great opportunity and very concrete, you know, objective to get out of the strategic planning process to help shape the revision of the scoring process, right? You have the opportunity to make that shift, then how do you make decisions on what goes and what comes into that process? So I think we'll shift to telling you what what stood out to us, what jumped out at us from combing through the news articles and the University of Michigan data in particular. We thought they did an awesome job with their survey. The one thing, we did go back and look more carefully at the open-ended comments because we wanted to know what did people comment on when they wrote in comments at the end of the survey. So we did a little additional analysis, but we were really impressed with that. You want to share a few things?
I'm wondering, Nika, first, how many people are familiar with the overall results of that
Yeah,
survey?
that's
The
right.
contingent value approach to the survey? Is anyone not very familiar and you want a quick highlights of that and then it's with the comments?
That would be a good refresher.
I think it's
for everyone,
really
right?
thrilling. So it was, and I'm not familiar with the methodology, but trust me, they were, and there was a lot of good writing on it. So a contingent value survey was to try to measure the value of a non-market good. And what would you pay to keep something in existence? You know, even if you don't plan to use it, what's it worth for the common good? What's the value you see in it? So what's this worth to you? And they compared actually willingness to pay as a key measure, but to actual tax amounts. So overall, the response was very positive. They sent it to about 1,300 people, got 441 respondents, and their PowerPoint said lots of support. But yeses were 52%, and I don't know the methodology on this, but the no's are only 31, so it's not 52-48, but overwhelmingly people said yes, and the amount that they would pay. So it was actually kind of a bid process, built into this survey methodology. And people were willing to pay about $127 a year, which comes up to a $56K for the numbers of respondents times the year of the millage, comes up to $56K for tax willingness to pay. The actual cost is $25K, so that's why they say lots of support, more than double the amount of what people are actually paying. When asked in theory, this was what they said of people that responded. So that was the high-level overall outcome, which led them to say there's a strong level of support to continue to support that. But we also said there's a lot of comments, let's read more, and I'll ask Anika, you can talk through kind of what you heard in there.
Fran, that framing is really helpful because one of the comments people brought up was taxes, funding and taxes, and then one day I was like, well, we're not asking you to raise the tax, you already agreed to that 15 years ago. So then we were talking about the way that the survey was conducted. So, you know, it was asking people to consider whether they would pay more. But that's not a question you're asking them necessarily to consider right now because you have the funding.
Can I just ask a question on the survey or the responses? Did they comment at all on whether there was a bias in who responds? Is that a known bias and a willingness to pay type of survey? That those who are more willing to pay are more willing?
But 1,304, no, it was obviously a random draw, a random selection in terms of who got the survey. But 441, they didn't say anything about the bias in who responded.
I was just curious if that's a standard.
What would your assumptions be, Sheila, on that?
That the people who respond are more likely to be willing to pay.
Okay. My assumption
Yeah.
was it would be skewed, like, I'm very unhappy, the middle would kind of let it go, but not.
Possibly, yeah, and so I don't know. That's why I wondered if they comment on, that must be typical for that kind of survey.
I didn't see them talk about bias in response.
Okay, just curious.
Did you see, remember?
No,
reading
but
it?
was there, in terms of who it was sent to,
was
property owners? So that did jump out to us because they're not the only stakeholders in
Oh,
this
true,
work.
okay, yeah.
And it's something we've been talking about, trying to make sure that we're tapping a wide range of stakeholders. Okay, so we consider this work that the University of Michigan, and I assume it was many students, did as sort of the early messaging that we are getting from public engagement, right? So what did we hear? A fair amount of general support or strong general support for green space, open spaces and farms, preserving and restoring natural areas. Our children and community need to unplug, breathe fresh air, eat clean, and appreciate beauty. For example, that was a quote. There were some folks who felt generally opposed. I don't see a strategic value. Cue the opportunity for education. I was a big fan of the Greenbelt. Since then, it has proved of little value. I see no evidence of progress. Another comment, it has a gentrification feel now. Okay, so those were some of the general concerns. Regarding funding and taxes, cannot afford any more taxes. It sounds like Ann Arbor city residents are subsidizing township residents. General concerns about affordability. Concerns around housing development impact, affordability, and diversity. Downside of the Greenbelt equals escalating real estate prices within the Greenbelt, which I think is an important, I would like to almost have a question mark around that, right? Downside, Greenbelt equals escalating real estate prices? Is that true? I don't know. I worry the Greenbelt program could increase housing prices by restricting new development. So those are the types of concerns people raised. There were also ideas for Greenbelt investment strategies. The one that really had the most comments was about woodlands, waterways, public access, sustainable agriculture. We like woods and streams much more than cornfields. We believe responsible farming is critical to effective stewardship of the land, commitment to sustainable farming. I strongly support the work to preserve undeveloped natural land, especially wildlife corridors, and to a lesser degree, although also important, farmland. There were some comments about an Ann Arbor focus. I would personally prefer Greenland very close to the city boundary. There were comments, a few, on contiguous land. The Greenbelt properties are disconnected and not generally accessible to the public. And then one of the questions of clarification that stood out to me, I had no idea about this Greenbelt, and urban and regional planning is my field. So again, we've heard clearly there's an opportunity to start by sharing with folks, educating them on what the Greenbelt is, what it was intended to do and not to do, and then to get ideas about the future. Anything else?
Can I add
Yeah,
one comment? Thank you.
Yeah.
on the tax and basically the concern voice, it's a value, but at what cost? What are we competing with? Affordable housing called out, even, this was 2018, even before the voices have been louder since then. But a concern that Ann Arbor is looking at millage as a solution to everything. And that the move on that works against diversity in the community, works against affordability in our community, and that goes along with that gentrification comment. We're creating a more and more expensive and elite city, and we are protecting around the edges in a way that make it harder for more people that we want to be here. And so you can see kind of a decreasing support for the green if it's going to counter a community that you want to live in that has diversity. There were at least 2 or 3 or 4 comments in there that talked quite a bit about housing, and we got schools have to be great. So there's just, I value this, but I don't value it more than X, or I might not value it more than X. And the more you go after a millage, the less you have a community that people can access in. It's just too tax. So that kind of comment, typical supporters that you might usually have moving, I'd say, in the direction of questioning competing values.
Anybody want to share any reflections or thoughts on that particular theme?
One of the things that, as you were talking about these comments, that I thought about was just the lack of communication about the Greenbelt program, and I just wonder about, with not having a 7-day-a-week newspaper, how that has affected the knowledge about the Greenbelt, because that was when the Greenbelt was being proposed, where all of the information was getting out into the community about what it was. And when it first started, those first 5 years, there was negativity about how people felt like there wasn't a lot of land yet being protected, but things have really ramped up, and I think not having a paper publication could affect that, people's perception.
When you look through the files of all the publicity around the Greenbelt that we do have, it's amazing the drop once newspapers really started to struggle. There was a beat reporter that was at every single GAC meeting for years, and took better notes than any of us, and you could read the article and glean really what we were digesting in a meeting. It was an incredible reporting job, and now that resource is gone, and the community's not having access to that other than
Right.
thankfully secure.
Yeah, so we really need to, I think, address that.
Actually really struck by the nuance of the comments on both sides. It actually they're actually more in-depth than I thought they would be. And so probably that speaks to the quality of the questions that were being asked, and that there is actually maybe more knowledge and reflection of at least parts of the program than we're giving credit to, because, I look at the negative comments, and it's not about we're just being taxed and taxes are bad. It really is about a conversation about trade-offs and values that I think we, as a council think about all the time. And, and I don't think some of them are wrong, because we didn't hold up our end of the bargain, which was supposed to be building more density within if you're going to be protecting land on the outside. And, and so, and that's not, the problem is that's not the Greenbelt or staff or this person's fault, right? So it's sort of being punished for, for our own successes while the other ones didn't happen, from my perspective, not everyone's perspective. And so I don't know that it can speak directly to, did the land values go up? They did. I don't know that you can attribute to the Greenbelt side. That's not, we do see evidence of less diversity than we had 15 years ago. We do see evidence of it being harder to afford to live here. So And we do know that there's a $1 billion ask coming up from the Ann Arbor Public Schools this fall, and I think that's something that, as we're going through our strategic planning process, we need to be paying attention to and thinking about, because it will be on the minds of voters, and how that goes will be, what the conversations are like in the community, I think should inform what we think about and how we move forward.
Yeah, just to continue on that, I think part of the problem is that the Greenbelt is an easy scapegoat to say that is not why the housing is going up. If anything, and again, I think that goes back to not understanding how we go about what we do. Like, we don't have a choice which parcels apply. We have nothing to do with that. So if anything, the reflection of the lack of diversity, I think, is more within who's already holding the land than it is about whether or not it's the Greenbelt existing. And I think that, again, goes back to the communication and how we talk about this issue, because of course affordable housing is necessary. But I also think there's many other roadblocks to that have nothing to do with the Greenbelt. So I think, again, having a more nuanced, broader conversation is, I think, important. And again, that's my perspective, living on the north side, where everywhere I look is subdivisions going in, so.
No shortage of development in your
No,
area.
not at all. So it's interesting to me, because I have definitely heard that pushback personally as well, not just in the survey format. I've heard people say, oh, you're trying to put a moat around Ann Arbor. I'm like, well, it's not really a balance. Anywho, it just gets into a lot of anxiety people have, and I think, again, that just underlies how we need to be really specific about what we do, but also what we don't do. Back to what Sheila was saying in the beginning. So.
And just a comment, we get blamed. So a friend of mine said to me, I was talking to her about the Greenbelt, what do you understand about it? Well, I understand that we paid $200,000 to buy a farm in Dexter. And I said, well, actually, Dexter is not part of the Greenbelt, and we don't buy farms, but that didn't calm her down much.
Well, but can I just, things that we should, when thinking about stopping doing, right? So to speak to that, like if there is, and we think about this for land within the city as well, like if there's a land that's not of high quality that is suitable for development, I think we need to think long and hard as a part of this group, is should we let it be developed and not just buy it because all farms are sacred, right? And really think about what is the mission of what we do, what are we trying to do, and balancing those needs that we have in the community. Because if it isn't, if it's not protecting waterways, if it's not high quality natural area, if it's not, then we need to be good stewards of those dollars and good stewards to the many values in the community, not just.
I think one of the benefits of participating with USDA is that their criteria really is about high-quality land, that you get a lot of points for that type of property. And so I think partnering with USDA on their contribution on these properties sort of underlines what we should be trying to achieve in good quality farmland.
Related to that, I guess I'm intrigued by this comment of, I used to support it, but now I don't anymore, and how much of that has to do with misconceptions versus when we say what our successes are, it's these acres. What does success mean to others? And I guess that's that public engagement process that's going to be so key, is what did they think it would be? And not just, and separate from increased housing that was outside of the scope of the Greenbelt itself, but what did they think the Greenbelt millage itself would do 15 years later? Like what does success look like to them? Because if we're so easily able to mark success, what is it that we're missing there?
Right. It makes me wonder if people view the Greenbelt as the city of Ann Arbor buying land outside of the city for public use.
Right.
And most of the deals that we do through this program is conservation easements.
Right.
So it's, and then trying to, because it's a complicated issue, trying to explain to the public what conservation easements are and what they mean.
I think it would be really useful in that public engagement process to just ask those questions about when you voted for the millage, what did you think it was? That kind of thing, because that'll really help clarify where the mismatch is.
Excellent. You're already getting to some of what we wanted to
You're
talk
there.
about today is, and we should keep an eye on that, is what do we really want to ask people, right? Because you don't want to ask them something that you're not interested in knowing, because that's just irritating. And there are some things that you really do want to know. And we already have a lot of data, right? We already know a lot of these comments and data that we had from before, but to dig down a little bit deeper and to like, tell me more about that. What were you expecting? What's value? What do you value? Great. I had wanted to mention that in looking through the news articles, this is not news to you, but just to add in some of council's interests that were reflected, preserving and strengthening the matching funds and aligning with the city's sustainability goals. And in some ways that alignment with sustainability goals may be a current point of pride for the Greenbelt and the success that it has seen. One thing that came up with preserving and strengthening matching funds is the alignment of priorities between, so you might have you might want to prioritize something, but your matching funders may have other priorities. So is it more important that you preserve your own values and priorities, or that you have the matching funds, because they may not always be, you might not be able to have your cake and eat it too. Anything else that we heard in the early siftings through? No? Okay. Great. I think with that, we're ready to hear and see what Remy and team have put together as this communication that we've been talking about wanting to do, and then get some feedback on if you have ideas for how to make it better.
Hi, Dad. I'm talking to you from a chair. How do we do this again?
Summer vacation.
No, that's the table. No, we've done this before.
Somebody's
Every
got
time I forget.
Someone's got a button.
There's a little switch,
There's a switch.
and this has got it. Thank you. Both monitors, please.
Right
No, can we get it out here too?
They should.
I don't know.
It should come up when.
Should come up.
It does.
I just saw it flickers.
Yeah,
Okay,
it does.
thanks.
Oh, we got good. The extra speedy
You mean
screen.
in terms of property owners? Yeah.
There we go.
Equitability. Yeah. Yeah. I just don't think we have it to choose from. But how could we
I apologize.
go
Comments
back to affordable housing?
written in here that are not visible.
Yeah, that's a good point, though.
We're going to review the first 15 years of progress under the Greenbelt. So when listening to this presentation, and please consider that this is going to be a useful tool for us when we're doing our public engagement sessions. This is going to be one of the things we launch that process with each meeting, so that everyone in the room, regardless of the stakeholder, will kind of be brought up to speed and be on the same page for moving forward with the discussion about strategic planning and comments and input. This will also be what I'm giving to many of the townships. I might adjust it a little based on the township and try and do some township-specific data and information and maps when we target each one. But this is going to be multi-use, and then also at the end of this process, at the very end of the presentation, when we do have an updated strategic plan, I'd like to do 15 years of progress and then add in a presentation about what the outcomes of the strategic planning process have been. But so we're all on the same page, even though this is no new news to any of you. The Greenbelt started with a vision that was overwhelmingly supported and shared by the city's voters, and the voters were willing to approve a 0.5 30-year tax levy to make this vision a reality. The millage funds both new parkland acquisitions within the city and regional land preservation efforts. 1/3 of the millage revenue is directed toward new parks acquisitions, and 2/3 for the Greenbelt program. While new parkland was easier to imagine in 2003, for most people that's a relatively easy concept, adding new parks. The concept of a Greenbelt program was truly visionary. Very few cities in the US had established similar programs, and in that way this was a pioneering program. The vision of the program was a city surrounded by the farmland that characterizes our rural heritage and sources our local food economy. It was a vision of safeguarding our drinking water, and a vision of open space, recreational opportunities, and diverse habitats surrounding the city. The millage funds both private development rights acquisitions and establishes public recreational areas. So that's the the primary ways that land conservation takes place. One is outright purchase of land, where then the public gets to use it. Your Waterloo Rec Area, your Pinckney State Rec Area, your county public nature preserves. The other method, which is sort of the invisible legacy on the landscape, is the purchase of development rights tool, which we will go into. So the bulk of the Greenbelt's work has been accomplished through purchasing the development rights on a private property. This is a cost-effective approach that keeps land in private ownership and on the tax rolls, but preserves it in perpetuity. What is purchasing the development rights? Well, when you own private property, it's like owning a bundle of sticks. And that bundle of sticks represents each right that you have to that property. You have the right to develop it, the right to enjoy it, access rights, and the right to sell it. By selling the development rights, a landowner is voluntarily relinquishing their ability to develop the property while still maintaining some fundamental rights to the property, such as to farm, to recreate, to sell, to a new owner or the next generation of farmers. But in selling the development rights, they have permanently removed the development potential from the property. What does that actually translate to? The millage passed, we made an investment, and the land we've protected to date. So to date, we've protected 5,491 acres of land in the Ann Arbor area. Of all that property, it has a total market value of over $64 million. But through strategic partnerships and leveraging matching funds, the city taxpayers have only paid just over $23 million for the protection of that $64 million worth of property. Here's the breakdown. The light yellow circle represents the total value of the properties protected by the Greenbelt. The dark yellow outline indicates the cost of protecting that land, or the development rights. And the chart to the right indicates the percent share of the total land's value contributed by each stakeholder. In short, we've accomplished a lot for an exceptionally low investment. Nationally, the Greenbelt's average for matching funds is exceptional. This is a map of the protected lands within the Greenbelt District in the year 2000, prior to the millage being passed. This is today. Sorry. Great. This is today. So around the same time the Greenbelt began, several other initiatives were spearheaded. Over the first 15 years of the millage, we've seen 3 townships pass conservation millages. The Washtenaw County passed a conservation millage, and there are 2 active land conservancies in our region. When I speak to other conservation partners nationally, they are dumbfounded by the wealth and investment that these communities in our region have put into land conservation. The density of programming is unique, and we should be extremely proud of it. And the role of the Greenbelt in shaping that landscape is significant. The highlighted properties are projects that the Greenbelt has either spearheaded or contributed funds toward. So that's what it looks like on the landscape, but it takes many forms, and the 3 main forms our impact has taken is protecting farms and farmland, our waters, and open space and biodiversity. So to start, I want to talk about farms and farmland. Since 1935, Washtenaw County alone has lost over 223,000 acres of farmland. And in Michigan, we've averaged losses of 2 acres every hour and 2 farms a day. Farmers over 65 now outnumber farmers under 35 nearly 6.5 to 1, and in 10 years we're going to see a third or more of Michigan farmers retiring, and in the next 25, 2/3 of all farmland changing hands. So where do we have a role in this? Well, to date we've protected 50 working farms, 5 of which, so 10% of the farms we've protected, source food to local markets. And the development rights sale has facilitated access for new farmers, 6 new farmers on Greenbelt properties. Our work averages to 1 acre protected every day within the Greenbelt district, and 40% of the land protected by purchase of development rights in Washtenaw County has been facilitated by the Greenbelt to some extent. While some are focused on the farms not sourcing food directly to Ann Arbor markets, it's important to realize that what we've done has a lasting legacy, and what we do runs in perpetuity. This land is protected forever, and we have protected the land base for serving local markets in the future as the landscape of local food shifts. Currently, the Greenbelt land that's been protected produces enough caloric energy to feed 55,000 people each year. This is a map of all the farmland in the Greenbelt district. So there are 87,000 acres within the Greenbelt district, but there are only 25,000 acres of farmland for us to protect. This is what we've protected to date. That represents over 20% of the available farmland within the Greenbelt district. Moving on, protecting our waters. We all understand the benefits of our natural ecosystem's role in filtering our water, our rainfall, and collecting it into our waterways, which eventually comes to our faucets. And we all understand what the alternative is. And with that, preserving this natural landscape, whether it be a woodland, a wetland, or a farm itself, does have natural filtration ecosystem services. The land protected by the Greenbelt constitutes an estimated reduction of over 120,000 pounds per year of total suspended solids entering our waterways, over 4,200 pounds per year of nitrogen entering our waters, and 768 pounds per year of phosphorus. We've protected 1,500 acres of Mother Nature's most effective filter, our wetlands. And we've protected over 19 miles of river, stream, and waterway frontage within the Greenbelt district. 60% of that frontage is within the Huron River watershed. Our final impact is about open space, recreation, and biodiversity. The Greenbelt has helped establish 10 new public nature preserves in the region, totaling 642 acres of places for city residents and the surrounding communities to explore. These nature preserves include 6.5 miles of hiking trails, over 1,200 acres of regional habitat that also contributes to sequestering carbon. And in all, our programs invested over $10.5 million into the protection of publicly accessible open space. Over the last 15 years, the vision of the Greenbelt has manifested into a successful program that the city should be extremely proud of. And looking back on our success is critical to discerning where we are headed next. With 15 years left, we currently have 2,000 acres of projects in the pipeline and 15 years left. So I invite all of us to reflect on the positive impact we've had and think critically about where we can improve, expand, or focus. So now your feedback on how to tailor that better for township presentations and for the public based on this would be extremely helpful.
I have one comment. You were talking back in the beginning about the townships and how they have their own millages, and then you mentioned the word wealth. All of this wealth,
A
and
wealth of,
it's a wealth of
Sure.
riches, if you will. But that was jarring to me, because
Sure.
immediately I thought, oh, Ann Arbor's a rich community, it's, only
Yeah.
has, anyway.
Great.
I don't have another
I will avoid that word.
solution.
I have a comment. I think it would be really great if you could maybe tailor a couple examples to each township. For example, you could do green things in Sealy if you're talking to Ann Arbor. And I think that is something that can really personalize it if you give them like a specific example of a property
Yeah.
that we've protected recently.
Yeah,
Because otherwise it seems
Yeah.
great and the maps are fantastic, but I think that gives it a little bit more of a personal
bring it home.
connection.
Right, and on that note, like mentioning one of the preserves,
Yeah,
Exactly.
and maybe one that's close to the city.
sure.
And inviting people to go, go see it
Yeah.
too.
I had a question, are you?
No, I'm
okay.
not.
The protected ag land, the 20%, was that just Greenbelt, or is that all Greenbelt partners?
Just our contribution.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
I learned a lot. That was really great. I think the stats are really helpful. I don't know if anybody else felt this, but I was worried about the gloss over of what the impact of development actually is, and that maybe that's something you can assume with the Ann Arbor audiences, but not with all audiences, and especially, I think you said something, we all know, this versus that, and the picture of all the houses, but I think that's a really crucial point, that people would value farmland over woodland if they sort of understand, and you kind of said it had
yeah.
that value of filtration.
Mhm.
The reduction of all the stats you gave of nitrogen and sedimentation, all that, is reduction relative to what? To development, I
To
assume, right?
development.
So I guess there might be a nice place to say, so relative to something that's paved, so maybe
Right.
talking in terms of paved
Sure.
would be a good language
Permeable
of
surfaces.
understanding.
Mhm.
Because the truth is, farmland definitely impacts waterways and definitely is not a panacea for water filtration. And so,
Yeah.
and I think with this audience, you're going to open a can of worms if you gloss it over too much instead of admitting where the limitations are, but also being clear on how it's different,
Yeah.
without going on and on about it. And I don't know if
The other-
anybody else felt that, or that's just from my bias, of the ecology of it.
Yeah, the other concern is not addressing the program's criticisms outright. There are obviously many of them, but I felt like addressing it opened a can of worms where the presentation would then go on for an hour versus the first 15 minutes to get us all on the
Right.
same page.
No, I think it can be positive, but just, I wouldn't assume a knowledge of what the difference,
Yeah.
the different effect of development versus farmland
Yeah.
on water quality is.
Definitely.
For the Ann Arbor audience, are you planning on talking about any within the city parkland acquisition?
I was focused on Greenbelt only.
Okay.
Because
But
as
it does
really-
say, 1/3, 2/3, and so
Maybe giving an example?
I don't.
Are there examples?
It's an open question. I don't know if it makes
Yeah.
sense to talk about it or not talk about it. But
I didn't
It is
want to,
part of the
to
mill.
invite comments on city parks,
right.
and then our limited window for engaging the public, then have a conversation turn into that versus about the Greenbelt specifically. But I maybe need to more carefully tailor the way we transition into that, and maybe prompt with that discussion. We're not having a conversation about parks or this part of the village, we're focused on
It's
this
really
aspect.
about the 2/3.
About the
And
2/3.
that includes when we talk about recreational lands, because obviously if you think about where some of the other 1/3 has gone, that's gone
Yeah.
almost exclusively, right, to, what
Yeah.
has gone exclusively,
Yeah.
to lands that can be used for passive or active recreation.
Right.
So it's, and that's where some of the confusion lies too,
Yeah.
I think, about what the program is and what it's not, but but the 10 million that you're speaking to was only for outside the city, so I think I'd just make
Mhm.
that really clear,
Okay,
yeah.
One thing that we had talked about before, the questions that you anticipate, you just know someone's gonna ask that, being prepared with that response So it may or may not have to go into the presentation, but then you're like ready to say, oh, thanks for asking that. And as you highlighted, like 1/3 of the millage,
Right.
and, today we're really focusing on this one, but it's important for us to remember that there's also a portion of the dollars that do go to public access land, so then you have your, you're prepared to address it, and you don't feel, I don't think you get that way anyway, but you don't feel like kind of taken aback by the question, but you kind of have, you have that information in pocket to share when asked. And you get balance between the presentation and then being prepared for the questions, they will come.
And I liked your commentary. You didn't just read the slides. You had some additional words, so it kept people interested.
Yeah.
I thought it flowed great.
Yeah.
This is a question for Julie. The Parks Advisory Commission, do they have a strategic plan that we could refer people to? As a, like if people
Parks
say,
is required to have a strategic plan for all of the parks every 5 years by state law in order to be
Okay.
eligible for certain grants. So that's the pros plan. So this gets integrated, is that correct? It gets integrated into the.
Oh, that I don't know.
But, so I don't know that we have a separate strategic.
it just would be, if people want to learn more about the park side of the equation, they can go here.
Right, I mean, there are scoring criteria, there are.
Yeah, because I'm getting that question from some council members about the park. And I said, we focus on the 2/3, the Greenbelt, but this is where you go for.
Right, because the question comes up about about the millage dollars for parks, why aren't you using it as quickly? And it's because it's money for acquisition, but not for maintenance, and so that the criteria are very different.
Right.
And the judgment about whether to buy land is different because you're using the same pot of money to maintain more land.
Yeah,
And
so,
so there's a,
I just want to direct people to that if they have
If
questions.
they want to learn more, and
Right.
also as a way to sort of shift that we can't have that conversation. We're not equipped really to have that conversation.
but I think you're right in terms of having if you want to learn more about
This is-
land acquisition within the city, here are places you can go to.
Yeah, maybe a slide that is dedicated to it at the end might be sufficient.
Or even just having
Or
it
answer
Or
on
have the
hand.
website
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Sure.
Any other comments or feedback on the presentation?
I just want to say, I think it's great to do really positive. I think you're right, not to open the can of worms. And just, you had really, those 3 really clear divisions of why we did it, I think was really effective as well. And the maps, for sure.
Maps and data are always.
Yeah.
Yay.
I was gonna say, I've seen a couple.
Substantial rewording, though, for the non-participating townships.
Yeah.
Would you say that again, Robert?
We have half our townships roughly that don't have preservation villages.
And your thoughts are about this presentation with them? What is there a?
I think this presentation assumes that local governments are participating with their own villages, but half of them aren't.
So thinking how to frame this story with the ones that are not.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's ostentatious, am I right? Like, kind of like, look what we
Yeah,
did?
it assumes facts, not in evidence.
Yeah.
So I realized that in our excitement to see Remy's presentation, I didn't share with you yet the draft agenda for our public engagement sessions, but now that we've seen that presentation, would also be a great time to take a look at that. So if you look at the desired outcomes for the engagement sessions, share the successes and challenges of the first 15 years of the Ann Arbor Greenbelt, which the challenges will probably likely come out in the questions, through questions. Identify stakeholder values, priorities, and potential strategic questions to shape the future of the initiative. So a welcome, an overview, and then Remy's presentation, which, by the way, took 10 minutes. That was a really nice, concise presentation. Questions of clarification from the audience. So we'll first ask, do you have questions of, to get clarification on what you saw? And then to have a discussion about what folks like, what concerns they have, and what additional questions that, they have that haven't been answered about the work that's being done. And then we will highlight some of the strategic questions that we're hearing come out of what folks are discussing and raising, right? So is there a choice to be made or a balance to consider? Remy will make some closing remarks, and then we thought we would move into more of an open house format where people could see some of the materials, talk more informally. So question to you, does that resonate with you as a general format for public and stakeholder engagement?
Can you clarify again? Strategic questions means questions that we've identified beforehand that we want to know of them?
In this case, what I mean is the bigger questions that the short set of bigger questions that we might need to ask ourselves in determining the direction that we would like to go. Just as a way to sort of filter up, we often are so interested in all the details, but then what are the larger implications of those details? What are the questions we should really be asking ourselves in determining the future direction for the Greenbelt? So I just want to help distill that for folks. If there's been a lot of conversation about I like this and I like that, and I'm concerned about this and that and that and that, then we want to kind of say, well, what we heard is you'd like to consider the importance of local food sustainability. You'd like to see consider whether there should be more emphasis on that, or so kind of distilling for them what we think are what we're hearing as the big picture questions.
So then it sounds like it's largely fed by what the audience brings up and less so by specific questions we might ask them, which would be, what do you think a belt is? Or do you think local food should be a major priority? So I guess I'm wondering why that strategic choice of more open-ended, let's see what, or it's both?
I don't really think if you're thinking, I'm thinking both and.
Okay.
There's from this, in fact, at the end of this conversation, we're going to ask that of you.
Uh-huh.
So there is a set of a direction that you
Okay.
are already mulling, but if we start open with what are your thoughts and reactions, and then move to more pointed,
Yeah.
we have some specifics. So
Yeah.
we get their broad open questions, but then we might have 3 or 4 that we say, we have some specifics
Great.
we want feedback on.
Yeah, I would just hate to miss that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's, what's the balanced portfolio look like? What about, we're thinking of pursuing land as opposed to waiting for it to come. What are your thoughts and reactions to
Yeah.
that? Depending on what you all generate.
Great.
Does that match, Anika?
Yeah,
and Ryan,
absolutely.
what you guys
Yeah.
are thinking?
Yeah, it's about identifying the questions and then discussing. So what do you think? We also would like to allow people to leave, when we're wrapping up, they would have a space to write additional comments. We know not everybody's going to speak up in front of a whole group of people. So if we can pose some of those questions, even if they don't speak up in the group, be scribbling their answers for
Great.
us at the end. And related to that, Remy and I had a conversation about creating an online space where folks would be able to come and submit comments. So we'll be thinking about how we want to frame the question. So it's not just submit your comments and complaints, but
With that,
what does success look like for the Greenbelt, right? That's the kind of question that.
Okay.
with that, I've taken some of the city surveys. Would it be something similar to that?
So we have not, we're not currently proposing, discussing, or having
Okay.
planned for a survey.
Yeah, okay.
But we would like
Just
to have.
a method for getting.
To boil down a couple key questions that we could provide as, to stimulate thought among those who might be submitting written comments or online comments. The difference with the online comments is they don't have a chance to see to see the presentation or to ask questions. Although the staff is thinking about what they do want to, have available online that people could look at, right? It's like the previous strategic plan, what other materials might they want to make available.
And
It's a
Remy's-
great presentation
The
to
presentation.
have online.
Remy's
Yeah.
Remy's presentation.
I wanted it to be a video, but,
We'll take you doing it.
So you don't have to
Yeah.
do it again and again.
right?
Just Skype.
some drone footage with this overlay, this information. Would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've done a great job of capturing what should be a communication video. So, yeah.
This is the skeleton.
Did you have a question, Fran?
Sorry, I had one other question about the challenges thing, because you say like successes and challenges, but you truly were talking about successes. Is there one challenge that you can think of that you would add in just to sort of have a challenge that we put out there? What has been the biggest challenge?
Matching funds.
Okay.
Can you say more
The
about that?
expectations, we do very well. Among our partners locally, a 50/50 matching deal is a knockout. But if there's an expectation even more than 50%, it's extremely difficult. As partners' millages expire, the expectations, the culture around matching funds may become more difficult. There are many programs in the United States that don't seek matching funds because it's not worth the time and effort, and they'd rather enter into a critical deal to see it preserved now and pay 100% of the value. So our success is matching funds, but it's also one of the things that is a bottleneck for our volume of projects. You know, if we were unleashed and all we need was 10% matching funds or less, the volume of projects could significantly increase, but we could expend the available funds faster, which is also a negative. So it's a challenge to find the right balance, but even 50% is an exceptional amount, and yeah, something to be proud of, but to question its utility.
Remy, I have a content question. I noticed you saying that in the presentation. Is there a regional or that coalition, the southeast, even the southeastern Michigan or national? Is there a benchmark? Is there a number that people have, formally said? It sounds like you know that through conferences and conversations.
Right.
And there's
There's
nothing
nothing
that's
published.
been quantified that we could reference.
No, I think we could ask all the partners what they average in terms of matching funds, and that might be useful information. It might be a headache for them to come up with that number. We've crunched it because our program has placed such a large emphasis on that. But yeah, typically we're seeing that 50% is a strong project, extremely strong project. Yeah.
So why don't we shift to what are some of the big questions if you're considering, well, to what extent do we want to shift our direction or continue in the same direction that we've been headed? What is rising to the top as strategic questions? I added this idea of matching funds with the right balance of matching funds before it becomes a threat almost. The value of contiguous land has come up, and the balance of farmland
Nature preserve,
versus.
Which really is development rights versus outright land acquisition? Is that kind of the divide we're seeing there?
Because those are the methods for.
Because are there any cases of buying farmland outright and turning it into a preserve? I mean, like it's.
For the county in
There are
several
few,
instances has
yeah,
bought some
yeah.
farmland and is in the process of
Restoring.
Or they
Yeah.
lease it out currently. For us, though, it's not entirely purchase of development rights for farmland. There are natural areas that we do purchase of development rights on as well.
Oh.
But, yeah,
Okay.
out of the 60 projects, only 10 are related to fee acquisitions where we're helping establish a publicly accessible area.
I think we need to ask something about what you mentioned, the who is doing the farming, right? A conversation maybe about intergenerational farmland transfer. How do we support beginning farmers if we know that in the county, the average age is 65 right now? I mean, I think that brings a level of urgency to it that is not in the conversation if you're just like, let's preserve the land. If we say, hey, this is critical, we need to facilitate this transfer to younger people who are then also investing in the community. I think that needs to be included somehow. I'm not sure quite how to fold that in, but I think it needs to be in there.
A question, Stephanie, in Remy's presentation, do you think he emphasized the risk enough on that? Did you feel it in the presentation, the urgency around that?
Yeah, it definitely reminded me that was, because I thought nationally we were maybe at 59, but I guess the county's doing a little bit worse, unfortunately. But still, yeah, it's a really critical thing, and it did remind me of that, yeah.
So the question behind that you would want to ask the public, or the ones that you would want to wrestle with yourself around that, would be, how would you frame it?
Maybe sort of like, would you be more willing to support these type of initiatives if you knew that that would be the result? You know, so it's not just preserving the land in perpetuity, but preserving the land for a specific new farmer to take the helm.
So that might influence your rating
Yeah,
scale.
right. Exactly.
Might you weight this more
Yep,
heavily based
exactly.
on this kind of data?
Exactly,
So-
yeah.
So maybe it's a
Yep.
series of questions relating to that scoring system of,
Sure.
should we give more weight to new farmers? Should we give more weight to local food versus, so we kind of and I don't know
Yep.
how many we want to put on that
Sure.
list, but that's basically where we're at, is trying to think about how to weigh these newer scoring criteria that aren't currently part of the
Yeah.
millage, but they could be, or
Sure.
not part of the scoring criteria, but they could be.
Well, the whole program generally supports new farmers because it sucks a lot of the value out of the land when we retire development opportunities. So the land becomes much cheaper for the succeeding generation to
Yeah.
acquire.
Exactly.
And that's something that the average person wouldn't necessarily know.
Yeah,
And we have
that would be-
specific examples. I mean, Green
Yeah.
Things and Sealy Farm both have been protected in the last, like, what, 2 or 3 years? And they fall directly in that category. So that could be a good example of a segue to say, hey, look who we have supported. Moving along.
Right, I mean, I don't want to add to your presentation, but yeah, getting at that, the cost to, somehow getting at the cost for new farmers, the cost of entry for new farmers.
Yeah.
And how the conservation easement process helps with that.
So I had avoided, I chose the bundle of sticks because of
Those
its
very
relative
triggering to me.
ease, but I avoided sample valuations. So the $1 Million Farm, we purchased the development rights for $600,000, and now the new and beginning farmer can potentially afford that once $1 Million Farm for now $400,000. I avoided that, but I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea. Would you like to see something like that? And certainly, so there's a sample, and then there's also just doing the actual, cases that we've done.
Yeah, I think, because in that way you don't have to get into hard numbers. You can just say, this
for
facilitated
an
the success of
example,
this.
right. Yeah.
But you don't have to get into valuation, because I think you're right, that gets into too much of the murky details.
Okay.
Just saying that it lowers the value and thus makes it more affordable for new
Yeah.
farmers.
Yeah.
And at the same time, allows the farmers to revalue
Yep.
What,
when they're still.
what's the alternative of, and this should be obvious, but maybe if it's not enough that in the presentation, you kind of say why farmland is valuable because it produces food. The alternative is that the food just is produced somewhere else, right? So how do we communicate, like, the value of not just local food production, because a lot of the farms are not producing food that's entering the local market, but maybe it's just acknowledging those other benefits of farmland, which is the aesthetic, the cultural, the heritage, the sense of a rural, the rural character aspect, so that it's not all about food production, because I feel like you might go down a slippery slope there of, well, but if it's only 10% local food production, or if we're just giving new farmers, I don't know,
I was gonna also avoid going down the rabbit hole of, we're heading toward a non-renewable energy
yeah, we could talk
downturn
about,
and
yeah.
hyper-localization
Yes.
at ultra pace because we have no more cheap energy.
But then
to
it's
burn.
suggesting we're going only for local food, and we're not, we're going for large farms
We're
that are
going
sending
for
their
a local
food.
land base, though. That's
Yeah.
that's the value.
Future farming, future
of
local farming, yeah.
The
okay.
capacity to have farming in our region will be
Yeah.
preserved.
Yeah.
Whereas without this program,
Right.
more and more farmland would have been taken off the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's
Those
the way, yeah,
words.
that's the way you said it, the capacity to have
Right.
Yeah.
farming in this
So-
region. So it's regional versus local, I guess maybe that's the distinction, you don't get hung up then on,
Yeah.
that we're preserving farmland that is not part of the local food market, and that's okay.
Well, I think we
The
also need
slide
to
was
be.
intended to capture that.
Yeah, I think we also need to be cognizant, though, of the fact that most consumers buy very little local themselves. So it's
Yes.
almost as if we're trying to hold ourselves to a criteria that most people are not.
Yeah.
So I think we also need to think more about a regional food system.
Regional.
As opposed to just, if it's only,
Yeah.
in this county side of the county,
Yeah.
it's local enough. Whereas we need to really be thinking about Southeast Michigan as a whole.
Regional capacity, I find that language really powerful,
Yeah.
personally, regional capacity,
Yeah.
as opposed to local.
Yeah, the emphasis on what do we farm now, or what's farmed on the Greenbelt properties now, there's a lot of excellent stories to tell about local producers sourcing to local markets, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we're not dictating practices, we're dictating on a landscape level what is here to farm in the future. And not dictating it, but having the opportunity to make sure it is available. So that's the true legacy of this program and others like it is. Yeah, it's a permanent change to the face of the landscape in the positive direction.
So I've thought about some questions that people will likely ask, which is perhaps not what we are wanting to get at, but I've written down a few. Well, one question that I do want to learn from some of the people going to this is, where do they get their information about the Greenbelt? So that's something I'm in, because then it can tailor how we get at sharing this information.
Yeah.
So two other questions is, we're going to get asked, what is the average cost to the homeowner? So just be prepared for that. And then a question that I have been asked is, why is it so long? Why 30 years?
Real estate is slow. And I think that's why we got a lot of negative feedback in the early years of the Greenbelt, is why haven't you made a Greenbelt yet? And it's just land transactions with this many kitchen, or cooks in the kitchen, doesn't go fast. You know, when the federal government and the township and the county and the Greenbelt are all working together on a single project, you can imagine how many attorneys are at the table. No offense, Chris isn't here. Good.
Okay.
And, it's part of the process.
And the recession did also happen,
Yes.
right, 5 years in, so
Right.
that's something important to
Right.
keep in mind.
Are there other questions that come to your mind that you're like, oh, you're gonna get this one? You asked before, Julie, about the parkland portion of the village. Questions that Remy should be prepared to.
Sure, just understanding the differences between, being able to explain the differences between the two, because the goals are quite different for those programs.
I definitely think someone's going to ask the question that came up in the feedback about the gentrification and real estate. That's obviously going to come up.
And I would be interested to hear your feedback on that, because I think you put it really well, Julie, that in one way, it's kind of like we're a victim of our own success. We are successful and therefore can be a target to that, in that conversation. I don't know if I'm saying the words correctly, so correct me if I'm not. But truthfully, the concepts of the Greenbelt has created and exacerbated the need for increased commutes and leapfrog development, or has increased the values of real estate within the Greenbelt district and inflated them. These are all things where either I don't have the expertise or time, or no one else has put time and expertise into looking into those numbers. So it's a conversation we can have, but I don't know what data is available right now for us to crunch and then have a meaningful conversation about that. And the meaningful conversation we're trying to have is, what are we doing for the next 15 years? And it's not supposed to operate in a vacuum. It's intertwined with all these issues. but are we the root cause of it all? I think that's, if we're asked that in a public forum, I think the only thing I'm able to say is I'm not able to answer that.
Sure.
There's so many factors at play.
It's true.
And
And it seems to me too, the fact that many of the township zoning is a minimum 5 acres, a single home parcel. I think if anything, that might be the root of the restriction and not so much the Greenbelt per se, but really just the zoning and how it's put us in this situation. And I guess maybe just acknowledging that it's an imperfect system, right? It's based on land ownership. Therefore, it's going to be excluding certain people just by nature of that. So again, I'm not quite sure how to wade into that, because you're right, we don't have enough data.
and there's
And again,
hundreds of years of legacies.
yeah,
Land ownership.
sure. But maybe it's just important to acknowledge, we've heard this feedback and we're looking into ways, to mitigate that or get more data or something.
Yeah.
But I think one really powerful piece of data that you were able to offer when we talked about this before was the concept that it's not a belt. So can you say for sure that we haven't had an impact on driving or housing prices or any of that? You can give that, was it 6%?
6.1%
of,
the Greenbelt district is protected.
right, okay, so something like that that basically
Yeah,
shows, so
which
you can show the successes of,
That's a
wow,
great
look how
point.
much we've done, but actually, so that's had an impact on the positive things, but it really isn't enough to have an impact
That's a great point.
on overall development prices, et
And
cetera.
I meant to include that in the conversation around the existing agricultural land in the Greenbelt district. This is 25,000 acres. So we've protected 5,491 acres, which is 6.1% of the total Greenbelt
Yeah.
district. That's not very impressive, but when you look at the ag land we've protected and it being 20% of the available ag land
Right.
in the district, that's impactful.
Right.
So there's a difference there in how you communicate the numbers and crunch them. So I meant in this slide to also reference, while it may not be impressive that only 6.1% of the
And I
Greenbelt
think-
district is protected.
And not even, may not be impressive, but that's where it can, I think that's the
May
perfect
not.
response to,
Yeah.
have we had an impact
Yeah.
negatively on development or on driving and all that? We couldn't with that little of a change in land ownership.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
sold.
I think too, it might be a time to bring up the fact that the city is about to go through its master planning process. And that, a lot of these values-based questions are ones that are, the way that we're thinking about going forward with the master plan is to start with a community conversation about values. And, so a lot of these questions around zoning are really more about zoning and development within the city than zoning and development outside of the city.
Right.
But I know you don't, that is not where you want that conversation will take you as far away from the Greenbelt as you can possibly go. But there is if it's not the place here, there is an opportunity to be having those conversations. And really that belongs in large part, not that this isn't a related process, and I'm glad we're having it at the same time, but that is an opportunity where we want a lot of public feedback about what are our values, about how we use land within the city.
And what's the rough timeline? Is it 2020 that starts?
Yeah, if not sooner,
sooner.
yeah. So, there's already a group of residents that are, one from each ward and at large that are helping to select the vendor that will run the community engagement and planning process.
Okay, cool.
So that's in progress. I also just wanted to circle back that there is section 5 of the PROS plan is all about land use and acquisition and funding from the millage. So,
Okay.
so it is in the PROS plan, section 5.
Yeah.
It's helpful to be prepared to prevent the conversation from going off as all problems that people have with
Yeah.
everything that's happening locally that might be tangentially related. So it's helpful to be able to say, thanks for bringing that up, and then point them to, this is happening soon. So that we can redirect back to, so we don't go too far off.
Yeah,
And recognize that that's of importance and log that as a value that people have.
sure.
But also kind of give them a push.
We discussed earlier, if one of you wants to tag along to some of the township meetings that I'll be doing, you're more than welcome, but if there was an ability for you all to choose 3 for the Westgate meeting and 3 for the Traverwood meeting, so you do not constitute a quorum, but you attend to help all of us steer conversations in the right direction, and keep things on track and on point, that would be extremely useful.
And the advantage of that also is you hearing it directly instead of a Remy, Anika, and Fran filter. So it's always good to, just get the whole experience.
So we have to coordinate because we should not have more than 3 of us present at those, right?
Unless
Okay.
you want to make it a public meeting offsite, which I'm not really sure how to do.
But there's no deliberation?
There's no voting, yeah.
So if there's no voting and no deliberation, then I'm not sure that you have to worry about that.
I did not know that.
So I would check with the attorneys, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Because we have public meetings where
Check into that.
more than 5 council members sometimes show up, and it's not a problem.
Great, I
So-
can look into that. and
I think it should be
I'll
okay.
send
I wanted to go back to what you said about what questions we wanted to know from them, and I agree of the, where do you get your information about the Greenbelt is a huge one, because I want to know how many say like, the commentary on the MLive, you know.
Let's hope not.
So that one for sure, and then this question of what do you think a successful Greenbelt program looks like? I would be very curious to hear answers to that.
Yeah.
Like, what does it look like? What should it look like now, and what do you think it would look like in 30 years, something like that?
I'm interested in the renewal aspect of it. And I'm not sure quite how to get at that question, but the interest from participants in when it's due, if they're interested in having it renewed.
I'm thinking about that a little bit too, in line with what you said about the schools. I mean, part of the challenge is it's gonna be some years, right? So we won't know what's gonna be happening between now and then. So their opinions, you know, may change. And then I keep forgetting the methodology that they use.
Contingent value.
Contingent value. That was kind of neat, because it got at like, if you were gonna be asked for more, you know, to support this, how much would it be worth? And what parts of it, what do you really value about? So that was kind of a neat methodology for that. So I'm wondering, is there something we can do that would build on that? Or does it need to be close to the time that we'd actually be asking folks for money?
Building on that idea, what I would say is there were many comments in the survey about how much they appreciated the survey and how much they learned from it. So it was really well designed in terms of information out, that preceded some of the questions they asked. People still had a list of way more questions. And it didn't have, I'm assuming the survey did not have the quality of the argument for agricultural land, because it's compelling here. And so I think there are ways to use surveys at different, this clearly was designed well enough to inform people previous to asking questions on multiple levels. And I think you could think of that methodology, you know, in another 5 years. It just was done in 2018. But it seemed like it really had very good educational engagement content.
And maybe what you're getting at is once the Greenbelt decided to do more education, even after the strategic plan process, because there's really the opportunity to then share the new strategic plan and
Right.
build up the interest and support. Maybe it's after a period of time that you can then come back with some sort of survey to try to assess. Because one of the downsides was asking the survey when some people were sort of like, oh, I didn't know. So there's an opportunity to do more education and then
Right.
ask what would you
Yeah.
support.
That makes sense.
Now that you have more information.
I have a comment. So where do people get their information? That's a good question. Where would they like to, how would they like to get their information? I mean, Facebook, I mean, we've got a Facebook presence, supposedly, Twitter
Just gonna start
presence.
going door to door.
Well, yeah, exactly. The newspaper's gone, emails out of style, direct mailing, people throw that stuff away.
We exhausted our
Both strategic questions and then questions that they
that we anticipate.
I had other strategic questions, I guess we'd kind of brought up, and I'd like to hear public response to what extent should the Greenbelt include criteria related to the city's sustainability goals, climate action goals. I guess we have the local food, and the water's already in there, but something more about, how much more should we think about those as part of what we do?
City sustainability goals.
And the climate action goals.
It's funny, I look at this list, the values-based ones, well, so maybe contiguous land, I don't know, but supporting a new generation of farmers, local food, protecting future farmland, sustainability goals, climate action, yes, 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 and yes. But then, what it really comes down to is prioritizing
Yes.
values, the hard part. So that's where my mind is going, is sort of thinking about how we can,
And I think with different audiences, I wouldn't assume the yes, yes, and yes. They might say, well, no, Greenbelt is for me to have a park. I don't care about carbon sequestration, and so
local food's not my thing.
yeah, I don't know. So I guess that's what I would want to know is how unanimous are they about that? And then we can figure out the weighting, but I would want to know even how much disagreement there might be
Are there
on
other
things.
that are really important to you that we haven't captured here? Other elements or aspects of the Greenbelt that are really what you care about?
Yeah.
That's that vision of success.
Right.
That open-ended kind of thing, to see what emerges.
Protecting the land from having to strip off the land.
The value of contiguous land one, that was based on comments that you saw?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They were questioning,
because it's like, doesn't look much like a belt, which may be.
oh, okay.
That could be a matter of educating that the term Greenbelt, it rolls off your tongue, but it was never meant to be a belt.
Yeah, yeah.
Or maybe there is some
Expectations.
value to contiguous land in terms of, I don't know, biodiversity or something like that.
Some of the contiguous comments were related to along the river. Are we protecting in this area here? And some was the belt thing, and it didn't look like, it looked random.
Mhm.
So is there more intentional and more strategic choices that might be made if you guys went out and solicited people to participate? And then the river thing was big. If we're gonna do it, the river needs protection along the boundaries.
Mhm.
But again, on both of those, I'm thinking, and not looking at numbers right now, but I guess that's 3 to 5 people out of the 130 some that left comments. But still, that is,
So really, it's the value of being more strategic in the placement of our parcels.
there were a couple that were very smart on that and very aware of river
Yeah.
protection stuff. Or they seemed more educated in that direction.
Well, I think we also need to remind people, though, that not every parcel is a candidate for this. Like it might be river frontage, but someone's lawn of 5 acres, like doesn't necessarily fit. So I think maybe that gets back to what our criteria is and how we do the assessments. And again, it would be great if we could go door to door, but even then, there's no guarantee. So people just need to understand that it's much more property owner driven than it is us acquiring parcels.
And you can have some weighted scoring that allows you to kind of have a priority.
Exactly.
right?
Yep, and those are things that are already in the scoring and already have a lot of weight.
Mm-hmm.
So people need to know that we're already, we already are doing that, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions you would have for folks in order to inform revisions to the scoring? Improvements to the scoring?
I just want everyone to know that there's something missing from this presentation that I intend to figure out before the July 29th Ann Arbor District Library meeting. But I want to know 2 really important numbers, and add to this if you want, and I'll add it to my list of questions. But exactly how much millage revenue has been collected to date, and projections for the next 15 years, which is very difficult because it's based on property taxes, and we have no idea which way the economy might go. But even a rough here to here, give or take 15 million, something that we can use to also influence, not necessarily a criteria-based approach, but informing GAC as a whole when we're scrutinizing each property for its merits. Is it one of the ones that we think should expend some amount of the remaining funds that we have? Because it's a 30-year millage. There's an end to it, and we can hope for the best in terms of a renewal, but I'd like to know how much revenue's been come in and how much to expect. Roughly. Gotta know what you think.
I should know this, so I apologize that I don't. When the millage was implemented, I think the city bonded to be able to, because land prices at the time were very high, and so, and I don't know enough about about municipal finances, and how this works, but so we expended a lot of money up front because of that bonding, knowing that we would get the property tax revenue in the future.
Right.
So that exercise that you want to do about I
We
think
have
it has to
debt
be,
service
depend
on
on
the
like how
bond.
much is left on the bond and,
Right, yeah, that's the question. we
Is
need
that
to
what-
answer. Yeah,
okay,
we have
all right.
debt service on the bond that we're still paying on. So for how much longer, and then on top of that, we have the debt service that we pay, but on top of that, we also still put money in the account regardless of the debt service to the bond.
okay, yeah.
So
So I'm interested in
we-
that.
yeah,
I'm just curious,
yeah,
like how much is,
I will
do
not
we
be
have,
mentioning that
how
number
much
because I'm
debt
not
do we have
qualified,
left
so
on the
I'm going
original
to set up a
bond?
meeting for someone
And
else.
how long was the bond, like, I don't know, how long was the bond?
Yeah, it was a 20 million, I think, upfront. So, yeah, we did have
Okay,
the initial
yeah, I was just-
surge, but I don't know.
Okay, so I do understand a bit of it.
Yeah. And
Just-
there's a number out there that in the beginning, and it's in news articles out in the public domain, that the millage was expected to generate 84.4 million in revenue. And I have not been able to track down where exactly that came from. It could have been an informational pamphlet from a local group that was supporting the Greenbelt millage to get passed, or it could have been something that very concrete. And it's just a conversation we need to have. And regardless, that happened years ago, and we need to update that conversation now about what to expect in terms of revenue for the second half of the millage.
And that was before the housing market
Right.
declined.
Yeah. So there's a lot of factors.
Sure.
But I want you guys to have that information as much as the public. So, work to be done.
So I think we may be ready to kind of move to next steps and wrap up unless people haven't, we've got through a lot.
I just had
here.
one, there was one other thing that came up in the scoring committee, and you guys can chime in about whether it's valuable to bring up as a strategic question for the public about recreation potential. And that's that issue of
Yeah.
how important
That came up.
Yeah.
recreation
Yep.
access is to you. Like, do you value farmland just for farmland's sake, or, and I don't know how you frame that, but something about, because it's in our scoring criteria, but in terms of weighting, it would be nice to know what
Yeah.
the public
Definitely
response
came
was.
up in the- So as we're looking at next steps then in this process, Remy's doing presentation revisions, but probably not many because it's looking really good, what you guys have put together. It's really impressive. We will prepare for the first meeting. It sounds like you don't need to, or maybe Remy will find out whether you need to be careful about how many people
Yeah.
attend, or we,
I'll let
okay.
you know.
It would be great to have your attendance and participation. I know Remy's also working on advertising the event, and as I said, making some space where online comments could be captured. Remy also has the task of following up on the summer township talk. This is the part where we hand everything to you.
I'm catching that now.
I know there's time on the agenda to call for public comments and et cetera. As I wrap up my portion of our time together, I often like to ask folks if you have any appreciations you'd like to share with each other regarding this conversation. So just to be clear, it's not an appreciation of us as facilitators or whatever, but anything that you appreciated about the conversation that happened today within the commission that you would want to offer before we close? Now you know exactly how woo-woo I can get.
Well, I must say that a lot of these ideas sort of percolate around the back of my mind, but it's so nice to have them written down and detailed. And now we can think, oh, yes, I thought about that, and now it's concrete, and it will be addressed.
I love lists. Put my ideas on a list, put other people's ideas on a list, yeah.
Well, I appreciate all of Remy's hard work in putting together the presentation and working with you and the schedule and all of the, it's going to be a busy summer. But I really appreciate your efforts, Remy. It's been great. I also appreciate having the farming perspective at the table here, because I think your input is very valuable as we go through this process. And also the ecology side of the equation and the city council. I mean, all of it is really key, and especially having Julie on the Parks Advisory Commission as well. That's important, so we know where they're coming from, and so.
It's a good sign that the makeup of the commission and this public process is working, right? You're getting a diversity of opinions.
I appreciate that everyone at the table is willing to take a critical look at the program so that we really don't just rest on our laurels and go forward in the next 15 years and make it better. Because that's not the part of service that often gets a lot of appreciation. So I appreciate the dedication of everyone at this table to dig in, and in the room to dig into that kind of process.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I just really like to end that way so we can reflect a little bit on, hey, that was a nice process we just went through together, you know? We appreciate the conversation. And then I guess with that, Fran, did you have anything you wanted to add in closing? Okay. I appreciate having Fran here because she has many more years of experience in public engagement than I do. So it's great to get to work with a mentor. I'll turn it over to you guys for official business then.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Next on the agenda is next agenda items. So does anybody have anything for the next agenda that they want to talk about at this time?
Well, will we want to talk about the first public engagement meeting?
Yes, so we can include that. All right, anything else to add? All right.
By that time, I'll have gone to at least one or two
And the
township
township talk.
talks, so I'll bring feedback.
Something on here is the closed session to discuss land acquisition, and we don't have anything, and that, this was primarily a strategic planning session, so we'll come back at that at our next meeting. Next item is public commentary. Do we have any? Hi, Jean.
Thanks for coming, Jim.
Yes, thanks for coming.
Plus one.
Next item on the agenda is communications. Is there a report from the communications committee? I'm skipping to F2.
Well, we have a letter, and Remy sent it around, and I believe we all said it looked okay.
Yep.
So we've got a letter that will go out to landowners, and I don't have it in front of me. Oh. Excuse me, I have it in front of me. But, so John Ransberg drafted it, we all looked it over. I think what we ought to do is just send it around to the commission members. But it just talks about that Remy's come on board, we are going to update our strategic plan. And, oh, and please come to all the stakeholder meetings.
Great.
In fact, one thing I think we don't have on here is the fact that there are going to be meetings in the townships.
But this wouldn't go to them, right?
That's just for the city.
Oh,
Yeah, there,
okay, never mind that.
So that's just going to the city residents?
you know,
Yeah,
the Greenbelt landowners.
Okay.
yeah.
I don't, look, we have a listserv of over 3,000 that we intend to send a similar invitation to the public sessions to, and then we've also, John also drafted a press release for the public engagement sessions for the strategic plan. So that'll be going out early next week, give about 2 weeks lead time until the actual event, till the first one, so we're working on that as well.
Remy, who will be attending the township meetings? I mean, who was invited to the township meetings?
Nobody. This is me getting on, so I spoke with Barry Lonick, and we had a discussion about the role that the land preservation committees play in the funded townships. And it sounds like they have a really good communication channel with the township boards of trustees in the townships that have a funded program. So Barry suggested that instead of going before the boards of trustees of each township and giving this presentation, for the ones that have funded millages, go before the land preservation committees and let them relay the messaging and the points that they want to their trustees. And then for the townships that don't have funded millages, I would be trying to get on the agenda for the boards of trustees over the next 2 months and give them this presentation, and then give some feedback, or collect some feedback, and then bring that back to the September 5th GAC strategic plan meeting, which is the bookend to the whole process. So there won't be a press release for those meetings. Those will just be on the township level agendas.
Okay.
But the Greenbelt landowners will receive a specific letter asking for their input because they've been through the process, they know it pretty well, and we want their feedback. The listserv that the Greenbelt maintains has, like I said, over 3,000 contacts. We'll put out a different release to them, and then the general press release will go to all our media outlets, so hopefully someone like MLive picks it up, and then we have, posted those public meetings at the district library.
Okay, great. Okay.
Anything else from the Communications Committee?
No, ma'am.
I'll go back to the Executive Committee report. The Executive Committee met, was it last week? Or the week before? I can't remember now. We met recently to talk about the planning for this meeting. Basically, that's what the meeting was about, to talk about planning for this meeting. And we also looked at Remy's presentation at that time as well. Okay. Questions on that? No. Scoring committee update? Sheila?
Yeah, I'm looking for the date that we met. I want to say it was June 19th. Is that right?
Yeah.
Good.
And went through the existing criteria that we had and went through them one by one, basically saying, what were your great questions? We had it, sorry, let me find the.
This was also Lee's doing. She helped, she was instrumental to the.
We went through each one and asked, is this criteria important? Is this the right criteria to measure? Is there a better one for this measure? And really systematically went through, managed to get through everything except for the acquisition considerations, so on the agricultural land. And so it was a good exercise in seeing what needs updating, what could be combined, and getting us to think more critically about how we measure versus other programs and how we could overlap with them. And then we kind of stopped there, knowing that we're doing the strategic planning process and would want to revisit some of these bigger questions that would influence weighting especially, and adding new criteria. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. All right, next on the agenda is adjournment. Does someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.